For the last few decades, baby boomers have been driving our economy and our property markets. But interestingly, they're not doing what everyone thought they were going to do. They're redefining retirement. And that's going to have significant implications on our property markets and on our economy and businesses. So if you're interested in property investment, if you're a business owner, this is going to be an enlightening show as I speak with leading demographer Simon Kuestenmacher about how baby boomers are redefining retirement and what that means to you and the property markets. So welcome to today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the fifth time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
Demographics has always been a major driving factor of our economy and our property markets. You know, how many of us there are, where we want to live, how we want to live. And baby boomers have been dictating many of our property market trends because there were so many more of us. Yes, I'm a baby boomer, so many more of us than previous generations. And it was said it's a bit like squeezing a tennis ball through a hose. There were just so many more of us. Because of that, we had to have more kindergartens. We had to build more schools. Eventually, we had to build more universities and, in fact, whole new suburbs for baby boomers to live. But by the end of this new decade that we've just entered, all the baby boomers will officially be of retirement age. So what's that going to mean for our property markets and what's that going to mean for our economy in general? Well, that's what I want to talk about today with my guest, Simon Kuestenmacher. Simon is Director of Research at the Demographics Group and he's clearly one of Australia's leading demographers. But not just in Australia, he's a rising star globally in the field of data management and insights. And I love reading his monthly column in the Australian newspaper. He's an engaging speaker. And so his last podcast was so popular, I had to have him back. Welcome, Simon.
Oh, thank you for having me back again. Much appreciated.
Well, Simon, the baby boomer is somebody who was born between 1946 and 64. And I guess they were called that because that large boom in population growth that occurred after World War II. But today, baby boomers make up nearly 20% of our population. So it's important to be, you've got to be mindful about it, whether you're in business, whether you're a property investor, because they have very much affected our economy and our housing markets. But as I mentioned, many of them are going to hit retirement age by the end of this decade. Some already have. What's that going to mean? Are they actually going to retire, Simon?
Yes, that's a really interesting question about how will baby boomers actually act in retirement. We now had the first couple of baby boomers already entering the retirement age, but it's only until 2029 that finally the last baby boomer will be officially of retirement age. Doesn't mean that all baby boomers will be actually retired. By no means, actually. We see right now this big shift in terms of how people are redefining retirement. The most obvious shift that we are seeing here is that more and more people stay in the workforce for longer.
And why are they doing that, Simon? Is it because they don't have the financial means to retire, or is it because they're still having fun, like I am? I'm past official retirement age, but I'm doing it because I'm still having fun.
And that is exactly what is happening. We have two distinct groups. There are more and more Australians who are in jobs that easily can be worked in for longer. Remember that back in the day, the Australian workforce was more geared towards really hard physical labor, where once you hit your 60s, after 5 decades of working your back really hard every day, you couldn't really continue working on. We're now shifting more and more into an economy where a larger share of the workers actually are sitting in offices, essentially, and can therefore, just from a physical perspective, easily work a couple of years more. And then more and more people choose to do so because they find the work engaging, and it's just a fun and a passion project. That's the nice part of working longer, because it gives you meaning and keeps you connected into the world of work for a bit longer. That's great. but we also parallelly see more and more people that are being forced to work longer. These are people usually on low income jobs whose money that they put aside for retirement didn't build up a large enough nest egg. And that always reminds me of this crucial importance of, if you will, lifelong retirement planning. We know so much how the income that people earn is directly related to a large degree to the level of education that people receive. And really, it's already by the end of high school that you know what kind of level of education a person will have. So, in a sense, we are putting um, the burden of planning for retirement on people in their mid to late teens, which is crazy if you think about it. But that also means that regardless whether you have some sort of really high academic degree or not, think about retirement planning, think about your finances very early on. And I would always argue that for a large share of Australians, owning the family home was a good safety mechanism to actually secure them against the potential financial problems, because if things went down the drain, you could at least sell this asset of the family home. But we now see more and more retirees that don't own their family home. And what do you do then if you are in a low paying job? You just are forced to stay longer in the workforce. You don't really have a choice.
Well, there's lots of wealth reports showing that the rich are getting richer. And in general, Simon, as you correctly say, it's because they own their home. And in Australia, it's also because they have a large amount of superannuation. What some of the younger generation don't realise is superannuation wasn't around when the first baby boomers started in the workforce. It only came in the 1990s. So a lot of baby boomers retiring won't have very large sums in their superannuation to see them through. So you're right. You have to take responsibility, because with more baby boomers working for a little bit longer, but not having much income, and then eventually being dependent upon the pension and the healthcare system, the government's not going to be able to fund that. Somebody's going to have to.
Exactly. And so the superannuation scheme in theory is absolutely fantastic. Just as a theoretical construct, I'm a big fan of it, because it means that every worker has their own little retirement bucket. You force people to have one of those buckets, because we know that lots of people just don't take care of their finances if they're not being forced or at least nudged to do so. So that makes an awful lot of sense. But as you mentioned, superannuation was introduced in 1992. So that means that only in the 2030s we will see the first generation that actually paid superannuation throughout their whole career. So we can't really see how well superannuation works until another 15 years or so. So in the meantime, it is really important that people take care of their financial future themselves. Um, and that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make people understand that it's worth, even if you're in your 30s or 40s, to have a clear understanding of what your life and your financial needs might look like 30 years down the track.
That's the problem, because when it's so far out, it's hard. Now, I do remember, Simon, that when I was young, my accountant encouraged me to put in some money into a self-managed superannuation fund. And I can't remember, I had 10, 20,000 eventually. And in those days, it wasn't compulsory. And I almost closed it down because retirement was just too far away. I needed the money in the short term. I'm so glad that I didn't do that, because the effect of time and compounding and adding value to it over time has made a big difference. So superannuation is one way, owning your own home is another. And then, in fact, using some of your surplus cash flow and saving for an investment and investing in residential real estate or shares is going to make a difference in the long term as well. Now, Simon, I've read some of your work where you've suggested that moving forward, there's likely to be 4 major tribes of baby boomers moving into retirement. What do you mean by that?
So when we talk about tribes, we try to understand how people actually use the retirement stage of the life cycle. And I'd say the first tribe we want to look at, I call them the lifestylers. They're people approximately between 55 and 64 years of age. And these are people who prep for retirement. They slowly put their things in order, their affairs in order, and then more likely than not, they actually slide into retirement. That means you don't retire anymore in the way that we were used to do, where on a Friday afternoon you received a gold watch and there was cake, there were speeches, and then as of next Monday, you entered your retiree phase of the life cycle. That is increasingly not the case anymore. What is happening more frequently is that people slowly slide into retirement. Means you go down to 3 days of work per week, and then you go down to two. Then you still are on and off consulting a bit here and there, helping out with a project here and there. But so that means that the kind of time of life where you are linked back into the work, that is actually going to continue past 65. And you prepare for this before 65. So the lifestylers, those people who actually had a good enough career, put their financial affairs in order, and then even while they're very healthy and young still, in their mid 50s and mid 60s, go back to work only part time, essentially. That means that those people have time on their hands as well as money, which makes the lifestylers the only group of the life cycle that has both time and money. All other
Hey,
generations,
I just realised what I am, Simon. Thank you for teaching me.
absolutely. I consider you a lifestyler, Michael,
Yeah.
and that's a great time to actually, or a great phase of the life cycle to actually aspire to be, because you want to do this. You're young enough to, if you have grandkids, to engage with your grandkids. Your own kids are adults. You are still physically healthy. It's a great phase of the life cycle. But so you do need to prep for it beforehand so that you can actually afford to take the time off, or to minimize the time at work. So that's the lifestylers. The next group I would call the active retirees. They would be between 65 and 74 years of age. They are still somewhat linked to work. There are a couple of those that are still working, but with the active retirees, for a long time, we told a narrative that once you hit 65, people tend to downsize their homes. That is not happening. The big downsizer movement that everybody predicted didn't occur, because we see now that the baby boomers that reach this phase of the life cycle, they are redefining retirement. They don't want to move into a retirement home. They want to stay active as long as possible. They want to stay in their family home as long as possible, and they don't move out of their family home because they want to downsize, but they only move out once they are forced to. Once the family home isn't actually providing for their mobility needs essentially anymore.
Now, I'd agree with what you're saying, Simon, because we see this a lot. But I know many of them years ago had the plan. They were my friends, my colleagues, who thought, well, I'll actually retire and I'll sell up my home. I'll move into an apartment, a townhouse, and I'm going to have money left over. And with that, it'll boost my retirement nest egg. The trouble is today, that if they do sell up and want to live in something that's still modern, because they don't want to, as you correctly say, go to a retirement village, they're nowhere near ready for that. They're not going to have a lot left over. So it's not worth selling up the home with the financial and emotional cost involved. So they're retiring in the same place, because they still want to go to the same dentist, the same hairdresser down the road, to be near their kids, near their friends.
Absolutely. And this, of course, then trickles down towards the whole way a city works. Because baby boomers, when they purchased a home 30, 40 years ago, they were, of course, done in the middle suburbs of the large capital cities, largely. So Melbourne and Sydney has a ring around the business center, CBD, where baby boomers are settled at the moment. And a while ago, a decade ago, we thought, yeah, they will all sell up their homes. And then you have the Gen Xers, maybe even a couple of millennials already moving into those suburbs. But in a sense, baby boomers aren't doing this and are therefore forcing Gen X and Gen Ys to move out further into the fringe suburbs. So it will be really interesting to see maybe 20 years down the track when baby boomers will be forced to sell up their homes or just die, essentially, who will move into those houses, how the wealth redistribution across Australia happens. So there's a real big physical element to this talk about retirement.
I think the houses in many locations will be so valuable, or the land will be, the houses will be old, that they're going to be pulled down and we're going to have more medium density developments. We spoke about that last time we chatted, that really our middle ring suburbs are where we need more medium density development, but it's really hard to find the land or the economics to make it work.
Exactly. And I think that's always important to keep in mind when you think about developing property on a smaller scale. If you're a private property investor and not a big player, because the big players won't be able to do this. They can't knock down an old home in Camberwell and put in 3 townhouses. That lend lease won't do this. This is something for a small property developer, and even potentially individuals who contract a couple of builders to do so. So that's the game will be changing completely, the property game, once baby boomer homes are being freed up or being available on the market.
Okay, so they're the first two groups. What's the next group,
So
Simon?
the third tribe, if you will, retirement tribe, I'm calling the downsizers. So these are the people that are aged 75 to 84 years of age. And so this is when people are slowly starting to prepare for old age. This is when you severely start realizing you're hip and it gets a bit harder to get up the stairs. Getting out of the bed in the morning is a bit tougher than it was used to be. And so you're slowly starting to consider moving your home to actually downsize. So it's only then when the little physical problems occur, that people will make changes to their housing behavior. And this group of the downsizers is by far the fastest growing population group in Australia over the coming decade. So you'll have baby boomers at scale hitting that age group and therefore increasingly considering what to do. Downsizers don't necessarily mean that they will move into a accessible apartment or a retirement village. It can just mean that this is a big boom of um, tradies essentially who make your home accessible. Because baby boomers, we know this, want to stay independent and in their own home for as long as humanly possible. You probably have to drag them out of their home screaming, if you wanted to do so. But so that's the big group that is actually growing the fastest.
I think there's a lesson in that each generation does things very differently to their parents. So as a baby boomer, how I want to live, how I want to retire, how I feel at this age, I think is different to previous generations before me. But similarly, the generations below me, the younger generations, have also got different lifestyle aspirations. So it's a good thing to remember that others won't be behaving the way you do or you planned. Because I remember many years ago, everyone thought the baby boomers would go to sea change, go to tree change, go to retirement villages. All those predictions didn't really come true, Simon.
Exactly. We overestimated the sea change and tree change movement collectively, I would say. And that's interesting to keep in mind. It also points to this still being an opportunity, in theory at least. And this is something because I'm speaking in a lot of sea change and tree change towns who are very keen to actually finally cash in on the retiree market. And so that's not coming. But so I think it's also a lack of imagination of storytelling that we've done, because there are lots of stories that are being told as we sometimes call it the baby boomer dream home. So ideally, once you hit the grandparent phase of the life cycle, you do really want to hold court for the whole family. So that means you do need to have a large enough home that you can actually have a nice open plan kitchen with a living room area and a garden or a nice view, so you can actually then have the whole family over and yeah, like I said, you're holding court for the family. That's an image that can actually be sold to a baby boomer couple that might have a house in Mount Waverley that is worth, I don't know, 1.6 million dollars by now, and they could purchase a home that does provide just that, that has enough room to hold the whole family for about half the price in a one theggy or God knows where in the surrounding area of
The
Melbourne.
problem is, will the kids come out there for the weekend or not?
Exactly.
That's
That's
the issue. Their
very correct.
lifestyles are too busy.
Very correct. And that's something where you actually then all of a sudden see that the lifestyles of the retiree generation, the baby boomers, is still very much entangled with the lifestyles of the younger generations. So we can't just only look at a generation in isolation, because we do know that generations have linkages. That they're socially connected. Of course, kids and parents are connected to a certain degree, and they will make independent lifestyle decisions, but they will also, at least to a small degree, consider the needs of their parents or their kids.
Okay, and there's one last group, Simon. Tell us about
Exactly.
that one.
That's the group. I just call them old age. This is once you are 85 years or older. And then we do know, just statistically speaking, that you're quite likely to have lots of physical ailments, and that your main goal is actually to continue to live independently and to live your remaining days in a somewhat healthy state. So then, really, it's only then 20 years after retirement when we're actually looking at care facilities, when we are looking at in-home nursing. All of those kind of considerations are only taking place at a much, much later age. Because sometimes in the narrative, when we talk about retirees, we think, yeah, people over 65. And there is a world of difference between a 85-year-old and a 65-year-old. And sometimes the quick big picture story that we tell about retirees doesn't capture the nuance that is actually occurring in the retiree market and the behavioral patterns of those different cohorts.
So clearly, having a much longer lifespan, and I guess in my lifetime, still life expectancy will be extended because of medical advances. That's going to have some economic impacts, and it's also going to mean that businesses should look at how they can take advantage of this large cohort of people who've got a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, because a lot of jobs today don't involve physical work. So what sort of jobs are let's take those things one at a time. What sort of jobs are these retirees going to stay in? And what can a business do to take advantage of this pool of people?
So when you think about the big picture changes in work, we do see that we are shifting more and more towards knowledge work. And within those knowledge work jobs, we see that more and more repetitive intellectual tasks are being taken over by computers. That's so far so good. But what that means is that the work tasks that are being left with the humans are increasingly work tasks of socializing, of networking, of this kind of, if you will, office politics knowledge, of this big picture network knowledge. This is kind of an information that sits within individual humans, that doesn't sit within a big complicated algorithm. So if you just let a retiree go at 65, never to be seen again, you are letting go of a big chunk of their network. And that's dangerous because this network knowledge is becoming increasingly important. So if I am a big consultancy, if I am a bank, I want to keep my connections with my retiree alumni, if you will. I want to have those somewhat loosely integrated into the firm so that I can call upon their network knowledge at given points in time. So that's the ultimate goal, and of course, it gives the individual retiree the feeling and knowledge that their wisdom is utilized, and they probably get a bit of money for that as well, which is nice to just continue to have a bit of income once you're past 65.
Well, I think businesses should promote employee mobility, cross-training, because the older generations can still teach a lot, as you say. And they should be allowing the opportunities for intergenerational mingling. But when I travel overseas and you see other countries where retirees don't have maybe the same benefits we have here, I remember years ago I went to America and I got out of the taxi at the hotel and the doorman, the porter coming to get my heavy suitcases out of the trunk of the car, he was in his 70s and I felt too embarrassed even to allow him to lift them out. You see a lot of older people in the United States and in Europe in the hospitality industries, I guess in some ways because they have to keep working.
Exactly. And I would say that's the biggest risk for Australia that I'm seeing here. Because as a society, we have been over the last 10 years, we created lots of more jobs that fall into this knowledge work, highly educated category where workers can work comfortably in retirement. We've also created lots more jobs in the low skilled and unskilled sector of the market. So these are your gig economy workers that are being paid by the hour, by the kilometer, by the gig. But we have been building no more middle skill jobs, the backbone of the Australian middle class, your manufacturing jobs, these kind of jobs. We didn't build out those trades jobs. So they are stagnating as a total number of jobs, whereas the other sectors are growing. So we're hollowing out the workforce. And it is exactly the workers in the low skilled and unskilled part of society that will need to continue to work on into old age because their 10% of their income that went into superannuation will not be enough to afford them a decent lifestyle in retirement. So they literally can't afford to retire. And this is not an epidemic here as it is already in the US, but the current trends are pointing into that direction. Which is the most alarming thing in Australian society and economics that I can think of, to be honest.
I can understand that. So, with a very large cohort of baby boomers and older people living for a longer period of time, many of them being dependent upon government for healthcare, for income, it means that we're going to have to keep importing people into Australia to top up the workforce, to pay the taxes. Otherwise, the burden's going to be too high, Simon.
Oh, absolutely. And retire migration always has been viewed very critically in Australia as well. Even though we're doing the integration of migrants, we're doing a great job globally speaking. And it's really the migration, the big intake of migrants that will make us that make it possible for us to finance retirement for so many people. Um, Today, we have 360 workers for 100 people of retirement age. 360 to 100 is the current ratio. Because we have so much migration coming in. 90% of migrants are between 18 and 38 years of age. 18 to 38. So very nice bunch of migrants that are coming over, highly skilled. So that means they create lots of wealth for the economy. And then only that big intake of migrants is really buffering the aging of the population. In 10 years' time, we will have 260 workers to 100 retirees. Instead of 360, we have 260 to 100. So we really see that Australia is aging at a fast pace. There's nothing to worry about if you look at those numbers in international context, because where we will be from an aging perspective in 10 years' time is where Germany is at today. So we're still okay, but it's really migration that is allowing our Australian retirees to retire. It doesn't work any other way. We need to amp up the workforce, otherwise the whole superannuation pension scheme falls over. And there's plenty of good that comes from migration, because I mentioned before that we didn't create, in terms of net new terms, we didn't create middle skilled jobs. The one industry that is adding jobs to the middle skilled workers is construction industry. Construction workers are the backbone of the Australian middle class. And if it wasn't for migration, we would have shrunk the middle class. We would have massively tanked the number of construction workers that we need. That means if you were to ever touch the migration intake into Australia, it's not the people on the top that would suffer. It's not even the people on the bottom that would suffer, but it is very much the Australian middle class that would suffer. So that's something that is, I think, not well enough communicated in the general public.
That makes a lot of sense. And to be honest, I'd not heard that concept before. So that opened my eyes in many ways. When looking from a property perspective, the fact that there are going to be so many more of us and that there are going to be a lot of 1 and 2 people households as baby boomers retire and eventually one loses one's partner, it's going to mean that even for the same number of people, we're going to need more dwellings. And that's going to underpin our construction industry, and it's going to underpin property values as well moving forward.
Oh, absolutely. Yep, that's what that means. If a society is aging, it means that you have, on average, fewer people per dwelling for exactly the reasons that you just outlined. And then, of course, the construction industry needs to react onto this for the new kind of property. But we also kind of suspect by now that more and more baby boomers will, or retirees of any generation really, continue to live in the family home. So there will be plenty of 4-bedroom houses with a single widow living, because once or twice a year the relatives will come and visit. So that will be the case as well. But then it means that while there is one person living in a 4-bedroom apartment, the family that could potentially purchase this home will buy a home somewhere else, and then in a sense you create a oversupply of bedrooms in Australia. So Australia, due to this kind of mechanism, will end up with lots of spare bedrooms.
And probably one television in each bedroom as well, Simon. We seem to have more televisions than people in most houses nowadays.
Absolutely. So that's another investment tip there, isn't it?
That is. So as always, baby boomers are going to be an important factor in our economy and in our property markets moving forward. So I think demographics is going to be more important over this new decade that we've just entered than the ups and downs of interest rates or the changes of government or other things that are going to occur, because the demographic trends are going to dictate the sort of property we're going to live in, how many of us there are, how we're going to want to live. So, Simon, I look forward to having you back regularly on the Michael Yardney podcast so we can dig into these demographic trends in more detail. If people want to find out a bit more about you, how do they do that?
So I guess the best way would simply to have a quick look at my company website. So that is thedemographicsgroup.com.au or simply tdgp.com.au. That's the fastest way to get in contact.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for those insights about baby boomers, Simon.
Oh, fantastic. My pleasure, Michael. Always happy to be back. Thank you so much.
In a moment, I'm going to share my mindset moment with you. But I just wanted to look back on the chat I just had with Simon. It was a great conversation. He's got such great insights that I've asked him to come back regularly on the show. I hope you're going to get benefit from the demographic information and insights that he's going to share with us. There's also another way you can get some insights into what's ahead in property. If you've been getting my regular blogs, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that coming up in March and April this year in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, I'll be conducting my annual one-day trainings, my National Property Market and Economic Updates. Now, I've been running these since the year 2000, and most attendees have to pay, but there's a special coupon code for people listening to this podcast. If you go to propertymarketupdate.com.au and use the coupon code podcast, you can come as my guest. And I believe this is the year you have to attend. It's the beginning of a new property cycle. This doesn't come up often, so why not listen to Dr. Andrew Wilson, Ken Race, a group of local property experts, and me at my National Property Market and Economic Updates. Go to propertymarketupdate.com.au. There'll be a link in the show note. Use the coupon code podcast and come as my guest. Now, let's have a chat about mindset.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset message today, I'd like to point out to you that everyone is doing their best. Now, here's what I currently believe to be true in life. I really do think everyone's doing the best they can. Now, I used to think people weren't doing the best they could. I'd get frustrated when things weren't delivered on schedule or on budget. I'd get annoyed if things weren't executed according to my expectations. I'd judge people as being incompetent. I now, though, come to realise that if I choose to think that everybody shows up to do their best, the best that they can, it makes me feel better. It puts me in a better state when I'm communicating with them. So that co-worker in the office who's struggling, look, they're doing their best. When your PA is troubled following your instructions, doesn't get it right, they're doing their best. When the client doesn't listen to my advice, they're doing their best. When the coffee barista keeps you waiting for your coffee, they're doing their best. You know, your parents who taught you things that weren't useful, well, they did their best, the best they could. Everyone's got a story. Everyone's got strengths and everyone's got limitations. Everyone's seeing and experiencing the world as they see it, not the way you see it. So when you suspend judgment, when you realise that your day-to-day certainties are far less concrete than you think, and you surprise yourself on how instantly things are going to change when you change your perspective. So I think you're going to be amazed at how people perform when you earnestly say to them, "Thank you. I know you're doing your best." As we come to the end of another show, I'd like to ask you a favour. If you got as much out of listening to Simon Kuestenmacher as I did, I'd love you to share the message with one or two other people. My aim is to educate as many people as possible to help them become financially independent, and I'd love you to help me in that quest. So tell somebody about the show, one way or another. Just do it through social media, or tell them about it, or send them a link. That'd be great. And if you're interested in telling the world about it, why not leave a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to it. 1 star, 5 star, make up as many stars as you like. I don't mind. But I just recently got a 5-star review. And when you leave a review, whether it's positive or negative, unfortunately, I don't get negative ones. And I'll read it out. If I read out your review and you email me, michael@metropole.com.au, I'd love to say thank you by gifting you one of my books, as I'm going to do for Marybeth via Marybeth 3. By Apple Podcasts, who wrote in, it was last year, saying, "Very informative and educational podcast. Have been following Michael through Instagram and Spotify and bought some of his books as well. And I'm deeply thankful for the great information being shared through the podcast and through the different social media platforms. I'm on the journey of buying my first home. I'm going to utilise Metropole services in Clayfield, Brisbane." Well, thank you so much. I'm very excited to hear that, and I look forward to being part of your journey, Marybeth. And so I'm also looking forward to bringing you 2 episodes of the Michael Yardney podcast each week. In between then, you can keep up to date with me on social media, as Marybeth had anyway. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course daily through propertyupdate.com.au. I look forward to catching up with you again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?